Welcome to the PowerPoint video on literary genres in the Bible. You should have a packet of incomplete notes that goes along with this video. Make sure you have that with you so you can fill it in as we go along. Let's start by naming our terms. A literary genre is a type of literature that is similar in content, tone, or structure. We will break down what each of those words mean in a moment. But first of all, I want you to focus on the fact that a genre has things that we can recognize that are in common. The way that you identify a literary genre is by its motifs. A motif is a repetitive characteristic, such as setting, plot, symbolism, style, characters, etc., that are associated with that genre. So, these two basic words tell us that we are going to identify certain motifs and characteristics that are associated with a particular literary genre. Then, when we find those characteristics and motifs in other pieces of writing, such as in the Bible, that will be a clue for us of what literary genre we're dealing with. We do things like this all the time, not realizing it, such as when we watch movies. We know how to receive the story found in a movie based on the motifs and characteristics of those films. If something horrible happens in a film and it's a documentary, we will be upset because we know it actually happened. If it's in a fantasy film, we might not be as upset because we know the story is made up. And so any upsetting things that happen in the film didn't actually happen, and so are more easily forgotten because they happen within the realm of fantasy. So, how we can figure out the genre of a particular piece of writing, specifically in the Bible. Well, first of all, we want to use the hints that we have. So, the first thing you want to look at is what book you are in. The book will give lots of hints to you in the book's introduction, the subheadings, and the footnotes. Sometimes they will even tell you directly what the genre may be, such as if it's the parable of the mustard seed, or if the introduction tells you this book of poetry includes this. Or the footnote might even tell you, this is a poem. When that happens, we say thank you for all of these wonderful resources. Also, there can sometimes be more than one genre in the same piece of writing. In these cases, we want to determine the dominant genre. So this would be, if we were using movies, let's say there is a fantasy story that happens to have elements of romance in it, elements of adventure and action, but the overarching dominant genre is fantasy because all of the adventure, all of the action, and all of the romance take place within the fantasy world that is created in the movie. We'll use those same techniques to figure out the dominant genre. Now, I promised we would break down those different words that were part of the genre definition. Remember, that's a type of literature similar in content, tone, or structure. So these are more hints on how to figure out a literary genre. The content is what the story is about. The structure is how the text is arranged. And the tone is what emotion the writer is expressing or trying to get the audience to feel. So, as we go through the different genres, you will see what the content of each genre is in its definition. Structure comes up in some of these different genres if they are set differently. We'll talk about that with poetry. And then tone, of course, is trying to figure out if this is emotional or not, if it is trying to get us to do something or not. And my best example for this, using film once again, is the tone of a horror film is usually to scare you. One of the best ways to see that is if you pause a horror film or a thriller and take away the music, it takes away most of the frightening aspects. So when you're looking for whatever feelings you think you are intended to feel or the writer's trying to make you feel, that is the tone. Now, before we go any further, this is the why do we care question. And that is, why is knowledge of literary genre important in Bible study? Well, knowing the literary genre helps us to identify the writer's intention. What was the writer trying to do here? It also gives us valuable information for contextual interpretation, like we learned in Truth and Interpretation. Plus, multiple literary genres can exist within the same book. So we need to know the genre in order to understand the interpretation, for the same reason that I gave earlier when I talked about movies. If someone went into a comedy film and thought that it was a documentary, when everyone else is laughing at the crazy hijinks and the, people falling and getting hurt, this person who thought it was a documentary would be like, why are these people laughing? These people are getting hurt. And then we would have to explain to them, no, this is all, for the sake of comedy. These people aren't actually getting hurt, or at least hopefully are not actually getting hurt. They're doing this, fake thing to make people laugh. That is their intention or their tone. So I've been using all these modern examples from different movies because that's what we're familiar with. Obviously, we are not as familiar with the biblical examples, but it is the same process that is used. So all we have to do is become more familiar with the biblical genre examples in order to apply them in the same way we would with film. And so, turn your page over, and as we go down the list here, I want you to really pay attention to not just the vocab, but also the hints that I give along the way. Myth. Myth is a symbolic story that gives insight into ultimate questions about beliefs, natural phenomenons, or practices of a particular people. You notice a myth when you find that it's answering the what if questions or the why questions. This is usually foundational about a culture or a religion trying to explain the unknown. A genealogy. It's always going to be some sort of list. Could be a family tree of ancestors, those who've come before, or descendants, those who come after. And it serves as a link to the past or a bridge in between stories. Poetry. This is the one where I said you would notice the difference in how it is actually set up by its structure. It's going to often include refrains and repetition, so it will be set up to look like song lyrics instead of like a typical narrative. We also notice tone here because it will express the author's feelings about something. It's also usually meant to be sung. A parable is a short fictional story told to teach a moral lesson or religious truth. These stories are not meant to be taken literally as if they actually happened. Rather, the whole purpose of the story is to teach that moral lesson or religious truth. So the message is more important than the details. The details can be changed as long as the message is preserved. Sometimes we get assistance here in the Bible, and it will tell us it's a parable at the beginning. But other ways to see here are if you can tell that there's a clear message that the story is trying to tell. A letter. A letter is a written communication between people or groups to answer questions, inform of events, or express theological insight. With a letter, you always have to seek more information because the little piece of the letter you're looking at probably won't give you enough information to determine it's a letter. So you've got to look at the surrounding text if you can. There are patterns to letters. They don't look like our letters, but they do still have a pattern to them. And so you need to look in that introduction and the subheadings and the footnotes to see if you can find those parts of a letter. Prophecy is not predicting the future. Sometimes that is included in it, but the definition of prophecy when it comes to literary genres is to proclaim the words of God for the sole purpose of bringing people back to God. So, this usually contains some sort of critique or punishment because the people have left God, and some sort of promise in the future if their behavior is changed by coming back to God. A law code is a rule of conduct or a moral code. These are the thou shalt do these things and the thou shalt not do these other things. So they're rules of behavior. Apocalyptic writing is figurative writing to encourage faith during times of trial. It often, but not always, concerns end times. When I say figurative writing, that means that it's usually painting a picture with words. It's usually telling the people who are going through the times of trial to keep their faith because in the future things will be better for them. And it also talks about how the people who have it good right now or who are maybe doing the oppressing of the people who are under times of trial will be punished in the future. And the historical/biographical narrative. This is probably the largest, most frequently used genre in Scripture. And these are stories that record what God or Jesus did to and through people. Now, here's the challenging part. God may or may not be an active character in the story, but the focus is always God directly or indirectly shaping the events. In the Old Testament, this will deal with God. In the New Testament, it will deal with Jesus. And the authors use the traditions and the stories from the past to teach or illustrate a religious message. And like we've seen before, the main focus is the message of faith over historical accuracy. This is the point where you are going to stop in this packet. There is another page where we're going to try applying these terms. But your assignment for today is to stop at this point, leave that third page blank, and we will deal with that in class tomorrow. Thanks for listening.